Hey, it's Joe, and in this video I want to go over what I covered in my previous post on Selenium IDE and in my interview with Dave Hefner, one of the folks working on the new Selenium IDE at Applitools. Check it out. First thing you need to do is install Selenium. Selenium is a browser extension, so currently it's supported by both Chrome and Firefox. So if you've used Selenium IDE in the past, the new version supports not only Firefox but also Chrome. So to install in Chrome, I'm just going to click on Add to Chrome and then click on Add Extension. If you have Selenium installed, you'll see an icon in your browser toolbar. So if we click on that icon, it will bring up Selenium IDE. All right, so let's create our very first test and project within Selenium IDE. When you start up, you have an option to either create a new project or open an existing project. Let's create a new one. I'm going to call it Joe Demo. And now the base URL is the URL you're going to use for your test. So I'm just going to enter in my test site. This will bring up your application under test. You'll know that it's recording because in the bottom right, you'll see a Selenium IDE is recording a message. So you would interact with your application. With the new Selenium IDE, what you can do also is you can right-click on your application and you'll have a new menu item called Selenium IDE. This is where you can do your verifications and assertions, and also you can store values as variables and use them later, which we'll check out in a moment. And you're going to give the test a name. All right, cool. So now let's see what the new Selenium IDE looks like and what it just did as we were recording our test. So the first thing I normally do when I start using a new tool is I just get familiar with the IDE. So let's just look at the different areas within Selenium IDE, and then we'll take a deeper look into what Selenium IDE actually recorded and how we can modify our script and run it and play it back. All right, so there's different areas within the IDE that I like to break things down into. The first one is the run section. And so the run section contains either a run all test option. So if we had multiple tests, you can run your whole test suite in Selenium IDE by selecting the Run All Test options. And you also have the Run Current Test. So of course, this is self-explanatory, but Run Current Test would be to run the current test. The other control I also include within the run commands is the test execution speed. So the speed control controls how fast you want the test to run. A lot of times, good practice is just to not always do it as fast as possible. For a lot of times when you run your test, there's sometimes network latency, little hiccups in the network that cause time variations. So to handle that, sometimes you want to run your test not as fast as it can be, but maybe just a little bit slower than normal. All right, so the next set of controls I like to call the debugging controls. So the first one is the step option. This allows you to step over your test case by running each command one at a time. It's really helpful when you're debugging to go step by step and look exactly what's happening at each point within your test. It's really excellent for hard to find issues that you may not know just by running the test and looking at the results. Another cool option is the breakpoint feature. And breakpoints are really cool because they allow you to stop at a particular line of code in your test script. This is really handy to have if you have a very long test script that is failing near the end of the test run. Basically, you can do is you can pause the running to see what state your application is in before you get to that point. And then you can then use this in conjunction with your step control to step from that point on to really pinpoint what's happening in your test at a given point in time. You also have this option to pause on exception. And what this will do is the debugger will pause before a red message appears in the console or in your log. So you get to inspect what's happening before things go wrong. All right, the next section is the test control panel area. And the test control panel area contains a command, a target, a value, and a description. So the command is the action to perform against an element within your application. The target is the value to use to identify your element. The value is then the value to insert in your element. Not all elements need a value, but if they do, this is where you would enter it. And the description allows you to really name your step in a human readable format and a description that makes it really easy for anyone to understand when they're looking at your particular test script. The next options within Selenium IDE are the Selenium console options. And for this, you have your log and your reference. A log will be step-by-step the results of your test. And we'll see this in a moment when we run the test. And the second one is a reference. So if you click on any step within your test and you go to reference, it'll explain what that command is doing. So this is really helpful to get the information about the command that's currently highlighted within your test, to get a little more information on what exactly it is and what the arguments are that it expects. So now that we understand the different sections within Selenium IDE, let's run our test and see the results. All right, awesome. It passed. Everything is green. If you look at the log file that we mentioned earlier, it will show you step by step what's happening along the way and what the result was. So another option within Selenium IDE is you can modify your test. So to modify a test, if you right-click, you'll get another Selenium IDE drop-down, and that gives you different options you can perform. So you can delete lines, you can insert lines, you can add a breakpoint, and you can execute a command. So let's add a new line of code and see how we can modify our test. So I'm going to highlight the line where I want to enter in my new line, and I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to click on Insert New Command. So the new command I'm going to enter is actually a new feature within Selenium IDE that's really cool, and that's the ability to add conditional logic within your test script. So things like if-else statements, do statements, timers, while loops, things that you're probably very familiar with if you're used to programming. So the first thing I want to do is I want to store the text that's returned to me when we selected operating system. So I'm going to click on the dropdown, and I'm going to type in store text. And for the target, which is the locator you use to identify that particular element, I already know its name about. So I'm just going to copy this and enter name about. And so I'm going to create a variable, and the variable name I'm going to call is my operating system. All right, so now I'm going to click on line 9. I'm going to enter in another line. So I'm going to click Insert New Command. And just to debug this really quick, we're going to use the echo command. So echo is pretty much like a print statement. And now I just want to print the value of my OS that was captured. And so we'll use the syntax. It's a $, open bracket, the name of the variable, which is my OS, and close bracket. So what this is going to do, it's going to go to the operating system. It's going to grab that text. It's going to store it in a variable called my OS, and then it's going to print that out to the log file. So let's see if that works. Let's run a test and see. All right, so I'm glad this happened. As you notice, on the echo, it printed out the value, but the value is not what I expected. So rather than store text, I'm going to use store value. And let's run the test again. All right, awesome. So when I rerun it, notice it has the correct value, Macintosh. All right, cool. So now we have a variable. We have it capturing the value we want. So now I just want to take a quick look on how you can add one of those new control logic features that we talked about earlier. So we're just going to add a simple if statement just so you get a handle for not only capturing a variable, but then making decisions on it later on, which is a very common activity you'll need to do as you create more and more complicated automated tests. So I'm going to add another line. And for this command, I'm going to use the if command. So if you don't know what the if command is, just go to reference and it will tell you exactly what the if command is. All right, for our target, I'm just going to use our variable. So to get our variable, it's money sign, open bracket, my OS, close bracket. And I want to say if my variable equals Macintosh. All right, awesome. So I'm going to add another line after my if. And so if my variable equals Macintosh, I'm just going to echo out Steve Jobs. Okay, I'm going to add another line. So now I just want to close that if statement. So to close an if statement, there's an end statement. And if you could see within the reference, a end statement just basically terminates that control flow. All right, so let's run the test and see what happens. And notice I have a breakpoint, and that was by mistake, but when you have a breakpoint, it stops on where you have the breakpoint. I'm just gonna get rid of that breakpoint and just continue running. And now let's look at the log file. All right, cool. As you could see, it created that variable. It held on to the value of Macintosh, and now that the value did equal Macintosh, it did print out Steve Jobs. So you can create more complicated conditional statements. So we could have added an else if statement to say if it equals Windows, then print out Bill Gates. So if someone was to take the script and run it on a Windows machine, it would have printed out Bill Gates. So the last feature I want to show you is awesome for running in CI/CD systems. It's the command line runner. And this allows you to do all kinds of things like pass capabilities, the ability to run tests on remote WebDriver servers. You could filter tests. You could change the base URL dynamically. You can use the YAML configuration files. You can run tests in parallel, and it handles all the executions for you and takes care of any sort of fail-safe type threading issues that you might normally run into when you're doing parallel execution. So a lot of cool stuff going on in this tool as well. So I just want to show you really quick how to run that demo test we just created using the side runner. So I'm just going to go and install it first. All right, so it uses npm. So all I need to do is grab this npm install. And I'm just going to go to a terminal. I'm going to run that command. Awesome, and installed. And if we look at usage really quick, it just shows you how to run a test. When you save a Selenium test, it's saved as a .side file, which is basically a JSON file. So let's run our demo script that I saved earlier. So now let's just run our Joe demo script we created earlier using the Selenium side runner. And all you need to do is pass it the Selenium side runner, followed by the name of your script. You can also pass it a whole bunch of other parameters, but I just want to keep it as easy as possible for this quick test. Awesome. As you can see, it passed. And as I mentioned, this is really useful when you're running in CI/CD. If you just want to create a quick and dirty test and just run it, say in Jenkins, because you can run it from a command line, it's very easy to use in that type of an environment. So I just want to say kudos to the original creators of Selenium IDE, also the people that brought it up now, up to speed with the new development environments that we're all used to, and for Applitools and everyone that's worked on it recently to bring it up to speed with modern type functionality.